You Greeks do not know your ancient history because your civilizations are destroyed by catastrophes. And each time you must begin again from the beginning.
The eruption of Thera. The eruption of Santorini, 1610 BCE. 60 years later, a young king of Egypt expelled a ruling dynasty that had occupied the land. He pursued them beyond Egypt's borders, and after that, they vanished from recorded history. The balance of power shifted. Egypt and the Hittites formed an alliance. Together they became unassailable. Every attempt to challenge them ended in failure. Sometime later, a dynasty emerged in the Aegean Sea. Their origins were unknown. Their name was not preserved. They left no clear place in myth or recorded history. As a new generation rose within this dynasty, names emerged that would reshape the region. Young Athena watched the shattered fleets of her father return in defeat. If this continued, Egypt would find them, and if that happened, it would be their end. Inside the palace, the king raged over the losses. He blamed his brother for the failures at sea. Elsewhere, an old servant warned of what might come next. More young men lost, and no victory in sight. Athena understood that the current path could not continue. The defeats at sea were not accidents. They were a pattern. And if they were to defeat Egypt, they would have to become what the kings of Egypt had already become. They would have to become gods. She chose to present her idea to her father, knowing it would be difficult, perhaps even impossible. But it was the only path that offered a chance beyond inevitable defeat. Her father agreed, but now she had to face her family and convince them. Athena knew she could not do this alone. She would need the help of Apollo, who had withdrawn to the island of Delos, far from his family and the limits that shaped them. Apollo was unlike the others. Raised differently, shaped in part by women, he grew apart from the expectations of his house. He pursued music, thought, and healing. Through these, he learned to see patterns where others saw chaos. His skills in medicine were not chance. They revealed advanced learning and discipline in the healing arts. His father had sent him on missions to other kingdoms. Through these missions, Apollo learned how courts functioned and how power was exercised. As his father focused on distant campaigns, Apollo gained space, and with that space, independence. Athena trusted him because he shared her fears. He understood their people because he was one of them. He belonged to the same family, and this is a trait that will remain with him until the end. Unlike the others, he could influence not through force, but through understanding. And through that understanding, he could persuade. Hermes stood with her as well. Her younger brother, aware of the danger facing their family. He understood people and was accepted by them. His strength was not power, but trust, the ability to move freely among them without resistance. Despite hesitation, the idea of forming an army began to take shape. Apollo was not merely a ruler, he was a leader, not of scattered followers, but of warriors. Men who bore the mark of the wolf and fought under his command. With Athena's arrival, his influence began to expand. Athena's plan depended on the strongest rulers in Greece, Agamemnon and his queen. Their unity held power. To succeed, that unity had to be broken. Control of the sea was essential. A naval force was required, led not by a god, but by a man, one known for his mastery of the sea, Odysseus. Athena would gather the Greek kings at a single banquet, where her father would present a military alliance. Apollo understood that before confronting the kings, the religious order in Crete had to be neutralized. In Crete, a matriarchal system ruled under Medusa. Athena chose to delay this decision, a choice she would later regret. Among the powers of the Aegean, one king stood apart. His kingdom was allied with the Hittites, who in turn stood with Egypt. This made him an enemy by alignment. Athena understood that the king of Troy had to be neutralized before his influence could grow. Apollo's influence had already reached their lands. A temple had been built in his name beyond the walls of Troy. Their loyalty threatened Cassandra, the high priestess of the city. For this reason, Apollo's temple stood outside the city walls. To reach Troy, Athena needed Apollo. But how would they gain access to the Trojan court? The only one who had ever entered Troy before was Apollo. He remained there long enough to come to know King Priam and his family, and to hear the dreadful story of Cassandra's prophecy, the high priestess within her father's court. That title in the ancient world was widely known, and was most often granted to the king's eldest daughter. Cassandra, who had rid herself of her infant brother, did not act out of prophecy, but to remove a rival within the court, a threat she could not allow to grow. And in doing so, she secured the position of her brother Hector with ease. For King Priam had many children, yet Cassandra chose to target the infant, and it is widely believed that her true intent was to diminish the influence of his mother, who most likely was not the mother of Hector and Cassandra. Apollo knew all of this, and he had a choice. There was the Prince Aeneas of the Trojan court, son of Aphrodite. For Zeus had long been accustomed to sending women from his court to kings in desperate attempts to forge alliances. But even this had failed. Within a short time, Aphrodite was cast out and returned to her father Zeus. The Trojan court had proven itself difficult to penetrate, unlike the courts of Greek kings. And so the question remained, how could they weaken Cassandra's authority and gain control within the Trojan court? Apollo understood well how deeply King Priam and his family were influenced by priestesses and by belief. And yet, during that time, he noticed something else, the weight of regret that had fallen upon the king after the loss of his young child. And then Apollo realized the only way into Troy would be through that guilt, through the burden that now lived within the king, and through the child he had lost. And in that moment, Apollo found his way into Troy. When Apollo revealed his plan, Athena did not hesitate to support it. Strange as it was, and dangerous as it seemed, it was not merely a bold idea, it was the only path into the heart of Troy. But one question remained. Would the chosen one succeed? Could he convince the Trojan court that he belonged among them? And more importantly, could he influence the alliances that King Priam might forge with the Greek kings?
Prepare the feast for our guests.
While Apollo prepared his agent within Troy, Athena moved elsewhere. She ordered a grand banquet, one that would gather all the kings of Greece. The palace was set in motion, every detail carefully arranged. Grandeur was essential, a display worthy of Zeus himself. The kings would witness something they had never seen before. Beings that fed on gold. In the ancient world, gold-covered food was unknown. Its earliest record was found in China, yet it may have existed long before the collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations, when their knowledge vanished with them. Meanwhile, Apollo worked in silence. Once he found the right boy, he began shaping him. He taught him customs, refined his speech, and planted within him a story he would one day tell at the gates of Troy. A story drawn from a harsh world, where unwanted infants were cast into the sea, left to fate without bloodshed. A practice not unfamiliar to the Trojans themselves. And so, the stranger could enter unnoticed. In the markets, the boy would be known as the son of a simple shepherd, but behind that identity, Apollo's design unfolded. The timing was precise, his entry aligned with a great festival under the eyes of King Priam. With guidance, the boy was trained. Every movement, every word, rehearsed. it was no longer difficult for the one who would later be known as Paris. Before his departure, he was brought among the Greek kings. He did not speak to them, he did not approach. He simply watched, memorizing their faces, learning their presence. For one day, he might see them again, inside the walls of Troy. Everything was unfolding as planned. The banquet, the gathering, the assembly of the Olympians. And for a brief moment, Apollo himself stepped away to visit his son, Asclepius, and his students, Machaon and Podalirius. All indications suggested that events were proceeding as planned. The attention of all present was directed toward the kings of Greece, toward the decision that would be made, and the moment in which the balance would be determined. Yet, in such a world, disorder does not always require conflict. Sometimes it begins with a single choice, a choice not accounted for. A moment when Paris extended his hand and did not merely observe, but chose to taste the golden apple. A quiet sense of alarm spread among the servants. The golden food had long been reserved for a family who claimed descent from the gods, and it was understood that no mortal was meant to partake of it. If Paris were to eat the apple, it would risk revealing the truth behind that claim in full view of the assembled kings. Action, therefore, became necessary and immediate. The kings of Greece had already begun to notice the young man's behavior. Any sudden attempt to remove him would only invite suspicion. And so Athena turned to a different solution. With the aid of Aphrodite and Hera, she introduced a distraction. A dispute was staged, the apple taken from Paris's hand, and he was called upon to judge between them. In that moment, the focus of the kings shifted entirely, away from the young man and toward the quarrel before them. Everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as planned. Zeus now presented a tempting offer to the gathered kings. Yes, Helen of the court would belong to the one who pledged to protect her and who would bind himself to an alliance with her family, a political pact that could shield them from expected attacks, whether from Egypt or elsewhere. The kings debated the matter among themselves. Would they accept such an offer or refuse it? In the end, they agreed to reject the part concerning the waging of a war on Zeus's behalf. Greece would not enter a war that was not truly its own. Yet they agreed that Helen would become a princess of Greece, and they pledged to defend her. Zeus was forced to accept the decision and to pretend that nothing had happened. Meanwhile, both Athena and Apollo had expected the refusal. They were forced to consider the harsher option. For the Greek kings, unlike the other kingdoms of the region, did not possess the established structures of administration or organization. All they truly possessed were soldiers, and even their soldiers lacked the known chains of command. In essence, the Greeks possessed an army, but not a state in the conventional sense. All Apollo and Athena needed to do was find a way to gather the kings of Greece in one place. Then remove them one by one. But where? When? And how? Their task was far from simple, for among the kings there were those who suspected them, who sought to expose them and warn the others about them. The Greek king Lycaon also harbored doubts about Zeus, so he decided to expose Zeus and his family by inviting them to a banquet of human flesh. If you truly are who you claim to be, then surely you would know that you are eating human flesh. What Lycaon and those beside him did not expect was that the banquet would turn into a bloodbath for them. It was not because the just king Zeus was horrified by the brutality of the act, but because his survival and the survival of his family had become threatened by the possible exposure of this lie. And not only that, but in order to divert suspicion surrounding the fate of King Lycaon, the host of the banquet, a deception was created, one that surpassed the first lie itself. After forging a fragile alliance with the Greek kings, and after Helen's marriage to the brother of King Agamemnon, only Troy
Fleet is
remained,
ready.
still visible on the horizon. And then Paris's first mission inside Troy was about to begin. After exhausting training, the timing had become critical. And after one final meeting with Apollo to receive his guidance, Paris was ready to depart. But he would not be leaving alone. Oenone was an expert in poisons during the Bronze Age, and it seems that she had mastered the art of silent killing, using her knowledge of medicine in an era when poisons were not yet understood and were often mistaken for illness. Together with her husband, Paris, she would carry out a mission to observe the Trojan court, and she would later be introduced as from the neighboring regions. But the first step was the most difficult. Oenone had to wait until Paris entered alone during Troy's religious celebration, and only afterward would he summon her. The celebration was divided into classes. First, only the sons of King Priam were allowed to enter the arena. Here, Paris's physical and intellectual skills would begin to stand out. His entering alone into a competition against the king's sons would bring shock and surprise, which is exactly what happened. This, in turn, aroused the curiosity of King Priam. Also, Apollo's choice of Paris was not random. He bore a strong resemblance to Priam's sons, and this was intentional, a preparation for the story of the shepherd who had found a small infant in Troy. And now Troy had fallen into Apollo's grasp, and Cassandra's voice would no longer be heard as it once was. Her prophecy about the lost son had failed, and Cassandra would never be the same again. Apollo had succeeded in neutralizing his first enemy within the walls of the city. And now, the darkest chapter of Troy's story would begin.
Homer. In the days to come, people will speak of our names. Some will praise us. Others will condemn us. Many will never know who we truly were. Yet they will remember that we stood here on the edge of a great war. Your duty is sacred. Preserve the records. Teach your students. Let no name be forgotten. We do not know how this story will end. Perhaps none of us shall see the final chapter. But through your hand, Homer, and through your pen, you shall bear witness.